This is C-Sim's neighbor, Jedediah. Jedediah is, in the most polite fashion possible, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and his lack of intelligence is often exhibited in more than a few scenarios. Whenever watching a horror movie, his brother shouted, "Jesus Christ," out of fear of the film's intense jump scare, to which Jedediah replied, "Where?" and then made a mad dash for his collection of crucifixes made out of nails. He thinks that Zelda is the name of the green-clad hero of Hyrule, which granted is a common misconception, but he's not talking about Link, he's talking about Tingle. However, what he lacks in cognitive intelligence, he more than makes up for with his proficiency in the field of strenuous manual labor. He's a blue-collar worker through and through. Don't tell him that, he doesn't know what that means. Give him a hammer, some nails, and a stack of 2x4s, ask him to build a seesaw, and he'll go above and beyond and forge an entire playground in less than 24 hours. What does he ask for in return? Nothing more than a cup of boiled peanuts and some commendation for his hard work. He's garnered somewhat of a following within the neighborhood, and C-Sim could really put his expertise to good use. You see, he's been having a leakage problem with his toilet for the past 2 weeks, and he's procrastinated on the thought until right now. Why fork up the cash for a new toilet when C-Sim can just give Jedediah a congratulatory pat on the back as compensation? So he made an appointment, and Jedediah agreed to fix the toilet. However, the night before C-Sim's toilet repair, Jedediah was miraculously struck by lightning after taking out the trash. But perhaps this could alter things in a positive way. Maybe Jedediah isn't just a hardworking handyman, but an intelligent, hardworking handyman. No, that didn't change a thing. In fact, not only did his brain function worsen, but so did his handy skills as well, made evident by his piss-poor job at fixing C-Sim's toilet. Things just got a whole lot more complicated for C-Sim. This is what I'm talking about today, NPCs that perform such moronic actions that they can effectively complicate a situation and make it far more demanding in the process. Enjoy!
Fantastic!
Dead Rising is a series I've spoken about a couple of times on this channel, but this video marks the first time that I exclusively talk about the very first entry, 2006's Dead Rising. This game was originally a launch title exclusive to the Xbox 360 that was admittedly pretty damn impressive for its time. Large hordes of zombies with little to no impact on performance, a surprisingly vast and highly explorable mall, and most notably the ability to use just about anything you can get your hands on as a form of defense against the ravenous zombies. However, for all of its technical achievements, there's one aspect that, to this very day, is a noticeable blemish on an otherwise pretty great game. I'm talking about the survivors. In the Dead Rising series, you'll stumble across panic-stricken survivors who are simply trying to survive the zombie outbreak. Most are relatively cordial, I said it right this time, thank you, but every now and then you might stumble across the occasional loose screw running amok. Regardless, you're gonna have to escort most of the survivors to the safe house. I mean, it's the honorable thing to do anyway. Sounds like a fairly standard ordeal, right? Well, you saw the title, what do you think? The problem is that, in the first game at least, the survivors exhibit about as much logic as someone with a room temperature IQ. Even Jedediah is running circles around these guys. Firstly, the survivors often lack the rudimentary ability of maneuvering around objects. Oftentimes, they'll just get stuck on the scenery while perpetually cycling their walking animation, even when the solution is as simple as slightly adjusting their position to the left or right. Meanwhile, I do the same shit in real life on a treadmill, and I'm admonished for it and viewed as a freak in the eyes of the general public. Granted, it probably didn't help that I was wearing a skin-tight tracksuit that bore a striking resemblance to my skin tone, but I digress. This also leads to scenarios in which the survivors will fortuitously barricade an exit or entry, making it damn near impossible to slip past them. And even when you do, there's a chance they'll continuously collide with one another to the point where you could be halfway across the mall and the survivors would still be stuck near a bathroom entrance. This example was detailed because I'm speaking from experience. Well, I know what you're thinking. At least they're survivors, so clearly their fight or flight instincts will prevent them from becoming another reanimated corpse, right? Wrong. The survivors in this game are absolutely atrocious at fending for themselves, even if they're equipped with a weapon. In some instances, it's better to not give survivors weapons at all, especially firearms, because this game does not disable friendly fire. This means that there's a chance that NPCs will swing a bat at a zombie, or attempt to fire a gun at one, only to inadvertently harm you in the process. And interestingly, due to some programming oversights, they essentially become useless to you whenever you're in a bit of a rough predicament. You see, whenever you recruit a survivor, they're programmed to follow you as if you were an unfixed waypoint. Get too far away and they'll follow you. Get too close, and they'll generally stand immobile. However, if you're grabbed by a zombie, the survivors lack a proper contingency plan or a response to the ordeal, as they'll just stand idle and watch as you attempt to free yourself from the zombie's grip. But since they're standing still, this also means that the zombies can overwhelm and eventually latch onto the inert survivor. This is due to a comically massive programming oversight, because the developers didn't account for how the survivor would react when their waypoint, i.e. the player, is attacked, causing them to be rendered motionless. And speaking of the waypoint programming, this also applies to survivors that are saved in pairs or groups, as the game programs one of the survivors as the primary waypoint that the other survivors can follow. But once again, the same issues remain, and you'll have a rather demanding time just attempting to escort these burdensome survivors from point A to point B. I actually discovered this YouTube channel, PokeSal, I think that's how you say it, that delves into the programming behind this game as well as some exploits that you can use for your own leisure, or if you want to get a leg up on speedruns. Go check them out if you're interested. Another massive issue is that bumping into survivors causes them to stagger and take their sweet-ass time recovering their sense of awareness. So for example, if you're plowing your way through a group of zombies, and you have a survivor trailing behind you, good luck getting them out of that scenario. Any non-grabbing attack that a zombie performs on a survivor will stun them and leave them with so much end lag that another zombie can tag in and effectively continue the combo, making a 5-second escape turn into a tedious and cumbersome half-minute ordeal. And that's not even considering the shockingly vast array of survivors that require walking assistance. Spoiler alert, they're even less useful than the already futile survivors, as they walk at a snail's pace on their own, so you'll have to carry them on your back, and you'll have to go out of your way to place them down if you want to answer one of the many calls that you'll receive from Otis. They're such a hindrance to your overall enjoyment of the game that you're better off just leaving them to perish on your first run-through. And then, if you're feeling extra generous, start a subsequent playthrough in which you attempt to save as many as possible. That's what I did, at least. And let me tell you, it was still an infuriating endeavor, but at least the thought of homicide didn't enter my mind this time. Oh, fuck off, Otis. I know there's a guy pissing himself in the food court. Don't make me consider using you as a fucking exception! Their AI was so infamously atrocious that the sequel would vastly improve and overhaul the NPCs to be far more proficient in combat and traversal. Hell, in Dead Rising 3, you can bring survivors in and out of safe houses so that they can assist you in combat, and they can even wield most of the combo weapons in the game. They still have their fair share of quirks, but I'll take these guys any day over the lobotomized and intelligence-deficient survivors from the first Dead Rising.
We need to get to that house. We'll have a better chance of fighting them from there.
Command card.
While we're on the subject of zombies, let's talk about Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 was the long-awaited follow-up to the acclaimed and highly influential Resident Evil 4, a game that almost single-handedly changed the gaming landscape in a myriad of ways. The perfect amalgamation of survival horror and action, exhibited in Resident Evil 4, was instead traded out in favor of Resident Evil 5's more action-centric gameplay, with survival horror elements peppered throughout. This is one of the primary factors that causes Resident Evil 5 to be a rather contentious entry amongst the fanbase despite its highly positive reception among critics. That being said, there's one element that was viewed as a divisive addition to the series: co-op. While you can play Resident Evil 5 solo, the co-op aspect was one of the primary selling points of the game. If you chose not to play with your friends, then you would play as Chris Redfield, while series newcomer Sheva would be your AI-controlled partner. Now, in the modern day at least, Sheva is actually a pretty convenient AI partner to have at your disposal, as she can easily get you out of a tight spot in more than a few instances. But back when this game first released, she was widely viewed as a massive liability to the player for a litany of reasons, and she still retains some of these issues to this very day. Let's start with inventory management. See, in RE5, inventory can be shared between both Chris and Sheva, which has both benefits and drawbacks to the gameplay. The added storage is nice, but the problem is that Sheva will end up wasting precious resources even in the least dire of situations. For example, if you put Sheva on medical duty and give her all of your health-related items, whenever you're even moderately damaged, she'll start jogging in your direction and become hellbent on healing your relatively modest wounds. This wouldn't be such an issue if Sheva didn't more often than not use some of the rarest health items in your inventory, meaning that even a slight graze will result in Sheva darting towards you with a health spray firmly gripped in her hand. Some players have hilariously reported running away from Sheva and scrambling to find a health pack in their inventory so at least some of their rare health items can be salvaged. But hey, if a woman like Sheva came running towards me, I'd either openly embrace her interest towards me or preemptively cover my gonads for the inevitable kick to the groin. It just depends on the context. This extends to ammo as well, as Sheva's concept of ammo conservation is practically non-existent. See, the game is coded to where the AI-controlled character uses ammunition based on the rarity as opposed to the situation. Let me explain. Pistol ammunition is the most common, followed by machine gun ammo, so on and so forth. This means that Sheva will waste every last drop of pistol ammo before even considering using a higher quality weapon. And even when she does run out of pistol rounds, she'll often resort to breaking open nearby crates in order to gain more pistol ammo. However, there is somewhat of a way to circumvent this issue, but even that has its its complications. You can set Sheva to attack mode instead of her default cover mode, which allows Sheva to utilize the better weapons in her arsenal and go full on scorched earth on her enemies. Like, holy shit, who pissed off Sheva and how do I avoid doing so? The problem with this, however, is that she gets a bit too brazen for her own good, as she'll intrepidly sprint into battle and attempt to mow down as many enemies as possible, even if she's punching well above her weight. Now, you might be thinking, well, what about the infinite ammo weapons that you can unlock after completing the game? Well, it's the same problem I mentioned earlier. The game only recognizes the rarity of the ammo, not the supply. Meaning that if Sheva has pistol ammo, but also has a revolver with infinite ammo, she'll first empty the pistol clip into the enemies before even considering to use the revolver. This doesn't seem like a big issue at first glance, but considering that Sheva is essentially your glorified second inventory page, it can be quite a pain to contend with. And, as a bonus, there's a chance that Sheva will unintentionally sabotage your plans of tactically eliminating your enemies. Because whenever you strategically lay a claymore onto the battlefield, she might end up waltzing over to them and picking them up because her programming makes her view these as discarded items instead of traps. And yes, if you're wondering, she has to stay alive in order for you to progress, because if either character ends up losing all of their health, it's game over. And on top of that, in order to leave an area and load in a new one, you are required to have Sheva by your side so that you can progress. However, as a nice addition, after you complete the game for the first time, you're able to play as Sheva in her full glory, while Chris takes the AI partner slot. Perhaps it was just Sheva, which makes sense given the unorthodox camera angle that you're forced into using while playing as her. But it's not. Chris is just as much of a liability as she is, but hey, at least he's better at exuding his pent-up frustration, even if it's at the expense of an innocuous boulder.
Yeah, what is it? You think you got a better idea?
When it comes to moronic and rage-inducing NPCs, Bethesda is the king of their craft. Well, when it comes to glitches and oversights in general, they're the king of their craft, but I digress. Fallout 3, as groundbreaking and innovative as it was for not only the Fallout series, but the video game landscape as well, is one of many Bethesda games notorious for some of its bugs and general developer oversights. This extends to some of the more integral aspects to the gameplay, such as the companion system. Throughout the Fallout series, you'll stumble across a slew of survivors who can end up becoming permanent companions if you play your cards right. And by play your cards right, I mean try to ensure their survival before they either become chow for the Deathclaws or a makeshift rug for the Raiders. There are a plethora of examples that I can choose from. There's Codsworth, for example, who is generally an extremely useful companion to have at your side. Hell, I covered it in a previous video of mine, except when he's barbecuing enemies with his flamethrower and accidentally pivoting towards your direction while doing so. And then there's Strong. He's a bit of an enigma, but he's mostly a blockhead. If you want to partake in some roadside cannibalism, then hey, he's all fine and dandy with it. But God forbid you decide to suit up in some power armor.
Human look like robot.
But Fallout 3 has an even more egregious example, or should I say series of examples, because almost all of the companions on a universal scale are painfully incompetent in more than a few instances. Now, companions are supposed to aid you in battle, right? Well, in Fallout 3, you get quite the adverse situation. If you charge into battle with the intent of killing your enemy, then your companion will naturally follow suit. But this can often contain scenarios in which your own companion will accidentally shoot you in the back while trying to fire at the enemy, which is quite the conundrum considering that friendly fire is in full swing in this game. If I wanted the feeling of having a bullet in my back, I'd ask my local chiropractor to pull off one of these little maneuvers. Okay, so maybe combat isn't their forte, but what about stealth? Well, if you're considering making a character with a stealth build, forget about it. Because if you're within 10 feet from your enemy, whether they're aware of your presence or not, your companion will unleash a war cry before charging into battle, completely negating your attempt at a silent strike. Now, with their reckless penchant for charging into battle with no consideration for you, or even themselves, you would think that these guys would be packed to the brim with enough armor and health to last an entire fortnight. No, not that one. Well, no, that's not the case at all. Quite the contrary, in fact. Unlike subsequent entries, companions in Fallout 3 can permanently die with no method of reviving them through traditional means. If you use console commands, it's possible to revive an ally, but if you're not playing on PC, or have some self-imposed rule about not using cheats, well, there's no other option. This is because companions are labeled as non-essential NPCs in the game's coding, which was either a flaw that slipped through the cracks or Todd Howard's way of relentlessly tormenting the players of Fallout 3. Regardless, it's a problem. Thankfully, Fallout New Vegas rectified this issue by only allowing companion permadeath on hardcore mode, with the rest of the difficulty options allowing companions to be coded as essential NPCs.
The chain, Kratos. My father once told me it maintains the balance of power within Olympus.
Okay, so far the previous examples of detailed instances in which the AI for the NPCs has some shoddy coding, or some aspects of it are overlooked by developers. In the case of God of War 3, the NPC in question functions as intended, but the developers deliberately made her one of the most aggravating characters to contend with in the game. Of course, I'm talking about Pandora. So when you're playing God of War, what are you normally expecting? You're more often than not imagining visceral, brutal, and barbarically violent combat that, on more than a few occasions, sees you separating head from limb in the blink of an eye. But don't blink too much, because Kratos doesn't discriminate when it comes to bodily anatomy. Towards the latter half of the game, you'll begin to see the early formations of Kratos evolving from a bloodthirsty and violent savage to a less bloodthirsty but equally violent dad who occasionally dabbles in breathing techniques when his temper is provoked. Yeah, it doesn't work. In this section of the game, Kratos escorts Pandora to the Flame of Olympus, which contains the aptly named Pandora's Box, and is seen as the only method of permanently destroying Zeus and ending his reign. What's inside of Pandora's Box, you may ask? Well, it depends on who you ask. It either contains all of the horrors, curses, and depravity that you can imagine, or it's a pretty neat Aerosmith compilation album. Regardless, if it doesn't intimidate everyone, it'll definitely terrify anyone past their 70s.
I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it.
In order for Pandora to make it to her aforementioned box, Kratos has to guide her through the labyrinth and vanquish any foe unfortunate enough to take him on in battle. I'll give you 3 guesses as to who you think's gonna win. Now, I'll start off on a positive note and say that Pandora is not a hindrance to Kratos when it comes to core combat. She'll dodge any move that you or the enemies throw in her direction, and there's no legitimate method of damaging her, which is great. However, it becomes abundantly clear that Pandora has a very reckless sense of curiosity, as she'll sprint ahead of you, and as a result, will find herself in the position of the damsel in distress. She'll continuously find herself trapped in numerous ancient torture devices, resulting in Kratos needing to quickly think on his feet before she succumbs to her fate. The first notable example comes in the form of a swinging blades trap that slowly descends onto Pandora. You'll have to briskly maneuver your way across the area before pulling a lever that saves Pandora from the brink of death. Now, you'd think that Pandora would exercise even the slightest amount of caution before excitedly dashing into the next room given her previously endangered circumstance, but nope. She'll blindly sprint into the next room while Kratos silently observes and does absolutely nothing, which leads me to believe that Kratos might be a masochist. I mean, I have a few theories as to why. Pandora finds herself ensnared in a box with water slowly filling up inside, and if you've seen any magic shows, you'll probably sit back and let out a cathartic sigh of relief. She'll make it out. But then you remember this is a video game, and all thoughts of tranquility and peace go right out the window. She's about to fucking drown. In less than ample time, you'll have to pull a lever which unveils a climbable wall, sprint up said wall, jump across the top of the box, climb up another wall, press this button, which causes the area to flip upside down, then manage to climb back up, shimmy across this stretch of area, and then... Your family fucking deserved it, Kratos. You have to perform all of these steps within a relatively precise time frame, with little to no accidents or missteps. Fumble any one of these steps and Pandora's lungs either fill with water, or Kratos gets smashed to a pulp. Which doesn't make sense because this is the same guy who is so unimaginably strong that he's able to yank his own soul back into his body. But the spikes are his true Achilles heel. Thankfully, after this whole ordeal, you don't have to contend with anything nearly as aggravating or difficult. Kratos, you need a new day job. Is vengeance really worth it? When you think of James Bond, you think of his suave, charming demeanor, his penchant for shaken martinis, his proficiency in getting himself out of perilous situations, and, escort quests? Okay, you probably saw this one coming. But Natalia from GoldenEye 64 is one of the most notorious examples of infuriatingly daft NPCs in gaming. GoldenEye 64's mission structure is arguably one of its best aspects. Instead of blindly running through a level and securing an exit point, this game is all about completing certain tasks that are allocated to you at the beginning of the mission. It encourages and rewards exploration, which is partially what made it such a kick-ass game when it first launched. However, there is one particular character that sends shivers down the spines of any avid enjoyer of GoldenEye 64. And no, I'm not talking about Oddjob. He's scary in multiplayer, but if you just cling to a shelf or jump over a fence, he can't do a goddamn thing. You know, because he's short. I'm not projecting, I swear. I'm talking about Natalia. She's one of the most egregious examples of an escort mission in video game history, and she's attained somewhat of a legendarily notorious status as a blotchy stain on an otherwise legendary video game. First things first, Natalia is not at all cognizant of potential damage that bullets can cause. She'll brazenly stroll in front of your line of fire and proceed to get peppered with your bullets time and time again. It's not like you can heal or revive her either. This isn't a modern video game. Once she's dead, she's gone for good. And it's also imperative that you intend to keep her alive because because if she dies by any means, the level automatically fails and it's game over. But C-shift, I hear you say. What about the later levels in the game where she gets a gun? And at face value, I'd say that's a massive improvement, but in practice, she only gets the most minuscule bump on the tier list. Because while having additional assistance is great, her firearm competency is lackluster, and that's putting it lightly. She'll wildly fire her gun towards enemies without any premeditation, and will not only idiotically attract enemies to your location, but also unwittingly set off nearby explosives in the process. However, as frustrating as the previous examples were, none of them come close to the handful of moments where you have to provide backup for Natalia while she's tinkering away at a terminal. See, in the early hours of GoldenEye 64, enemies initially choose not to fire at all at Natalia because they don't deem her as a threat. However, enemies will eventually attempt to shoot her on sight, even in the levels where she's unarmed. In the real world, that's considered a war crime. Fuck you guys. The most blood-boiling and stress-inducing example comes in the form of the mission Control, which sees you defending Natalia from enemies as she taps away on a terminal at a rather leisurely pace. This is one of the levels in which the enemies will attempt to kill Natalia, and let me tell you, defending her is not as elementary of a task as you'd think. It's a torturous and hectic fight for not only your life, but Natalia's as well, as they bust open doors, crash through windows, and fire as many bullets as they can if it means they can get a hit on either one of you. If you don't react in quick enough fashion, Natalia can potentially be dead within mere seconds of booting up the level. This, compounded with the aforementioned inconveniences, makes Natalia one of the most excruciatingly annoying NPCs in video game history. Alright, I finally caved in. Based on my intros, you probably already suspected that an entry from The Sims was inevitably going to be mentioned on one of these lists. And well, today's your lucky day, because we're getting meta with this one. The Sims franchise, despite its widespread popularity and established standing as a video game icon, is notorious for its bizarre and peculiar glitches, as well as some truly questionable NPC behaviors. Remember the infamous Demon Baby glitch from both The Sims 3 and 4? Well, there's a reason for that, and I'll give you a hint. It was the fucking nanny. So let's say you're playing The Sims 2, and your particular Sims are trying to get some household chores done, but there's just so much ground to cover in such minuscule time. Well, fear not, because nannies are a mechanic in this game, and in every subsequent entry in the series. However, there's a catch, because instead of Mary Poppins, you get Nanny McPhee if her nose never shrunk, her warts remained protruding off of her face, and her skin morphed into a bright green. In this case, you'd just get Gruntilda, or any garden variety witch for that matter. Except this one doesn't cackle and threaten to steal your dog, and she doesn't turn into a seductive sorceress when you quit the game. The nannies in The Sims 2 are such an impediment to the livelihood of your household that you're just better off getting your hands dirty and putting in the hard elbow grease yourself. Firstly, there's a chance the nanny that you've just hired will either be extremely reliable and hardworking, or ungodly and incompetent at basic household chores. For example, let's say a nanny's making some food for the kids. It's a fairly rudimentary task depending on the age. You could slap a piece of cheese on toast, toss that bad boy in the oven, and kids will eat that shit like candy. Meanwhile, the nannies in The Sims 2 watch 30 minutes of Food Network, become boldly inspired, and instead of making a delectable meal, they'll start a kitchen fire and incite a house-wide panic in the process. For the nanny, however, it just isn't enough, because she'll occasionally piss herself on the spot and probably blame it on the kids. Joke's on her, the kids are trained to piss in the backyard. And speaking of kids, there's about a 50-50 chance that they'll just be left neglected, with the nanny opting for channel surfing instead. If Food Network led to disastrous results, then maybe some home improvement is more up her alley. On top of this, there's also a bug that's still rampant in the game to this very day, in which the nanny will perpetually pick up and put the baby in a seat, then pick them up again, put them somewhere else, and rinse and repeat those same couple of steps while simultaneously neglecting to provide any other form of care to the baby. And for the more paranoid of avid Sims players, prepare to have your fears personified, because some of the nannies are sleazy kleptomaniacs, stealing from your money tree and some of your personal belongings in the process. And if you want to rid your house of a thieving nanny, well, there's a chance that she simply won't leave, and I don't know if that's a glitch or not. Maybe she really got used to the company. There's even a glitch where the nanny will take the baby from the household with her when she leaves, and the only method of fixing this glitch is reloading the game, where you'll find the baby in a rather befuddled state, sitting right next to the house's mailbox. This could be the game's form of a fail-safe if something like this were to happen, but I like to believe the nanny returned it after her nightly sewing sessions were tarnished due to the baby's behavior. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't the excessive screeching that left her agitated. Her husband's pushed a couple of kidney stones, and trust me, she's acclimated to that. She just doesn't like changing diapers. babysitters. What's humorous about this is that the series has consistently been plagued with issues related to the nannies. In The Sims 3, for example, the nannies are rebranded as babysitters, but they still carry a bevy of issues with them. Firstly, more than a few of the babysitters are equipped with the kleptomaniac trait. Ooh, they made it canon. Meaning that they'll steal your belongings if you're not exercising caution. However, you can circumvent this by locking away your belongings in a room. Secondly, the child kidnapping glitch was still prevalent in this game. That is until a patch rolled out and remedied the issue. But lastly, and this is a big one, you'll find that some of the babysitters are bestowed with the hates children trait, which makes me believe that they viewed the job listing in a quite literal sense. The glitch is even extended to The Sims 4, because when nannies were first introduced, there was a particularly bizarre bug that caused any sim who was introduced to the nanny to miraculously stop aging. This could be a beneficial glitch in certain scenarios, but when you're trying to nurture and grow your bratty snot-nosed child into a bratty snot-nosed teenager, a glitch like that makes things far more burdensome than they need to be. Thankfully, it was patched, and now, for the most part, nannies in The Sims 4 function correctly for the first time. And you know what? I think it's time to put that to the test. C-Sim could use the extra assistance when it comes to scrubbing his newly unkempt bathroom anyway. Here goes nothing. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Hey. Oh, well, looky here. Man of the hour, Chuck Green.